right, so really looking forward to speak to you all today. Thank you so much for the invitation also for the organizers. Today we're going to talk about creating product experiences for a sustainable future, designing for climate action. So how can we as designers become an agent of change? This was sort of the key question I already asking myself since a long time. Before we kind of getting into it, I would actually have a few questions to you to get to know you a little bit better. So first question would be, do you think, and I can barely see the hands because of the projector, but do you think sustainability plays a role for designers, or designers play a role when it comes to sustainability? If you believe so, just raise your hand. Do you think designers play a role when it comes to sustainability? Okay, seems like most hands, maybe 80%. Next one. Do you feel, as a designer, you already feel equipped to tackle sustainability or to incorporate sustainability into your day-to-day job? Do you feel like you're equipped for that? Do you feel like you have the skill sets for that and you kind of know how to do that? Okay, not many hands. Glad you came today. But and the next one is, do you think information technology, meaning our phone, television, our computer, do you think this takes up more than 10% of your personal carbon footprint? Do you think it's more than 10%? If you think it's more than 10%, raise your hand. So basically all your computer, smartphone, etc. All right. So let's find out. So this is an insight. This is a statistic from 2019, but it still serves as a purpose to kind of illustrate how digital technology, information technology, is kind of playing into an average footprint. This is a German footprint. Of course, this differs a little bit maybe to the Polish footprint, but still kind of shows that actually it's less than 10% on an average German footprint. So 0.8 tons kilogram CO2. And if we're looking at just the blue area, if we kind of split that up, right, we see actually this less than 50% is just the manufacturing of the devices. So meaning the manufacturing of the TV, the manufacturing of your smartphone, etc. So you could see that actually information technology makes less than 10%, right? So we could say as designers, well, we don't play a big role maybe in all of this. It's actually not so relevant, right? I actually think it's actually a complete opposite. Even though information technology plays just a very small part, or let's say less than 10% of your overall personal footprint, I still think it plays a big role because, in fact, information technology influences everything else in our life as well. So the content we consume, the solutions we're using, the products we're using, they all play a role in terms of what other decisions we make in our life. So I would actually say, as designers, we not just play in the information technology and the digital technology area, but we actually play a role when it comes to everything. Because we can use the solutions we're building, the products we're building, to make a bigger change. So a little bit about background about me, sharing you a little bit the learnings and how I kind of collected these learnings I'm going to share in the talk with you. So on the one side, I worked at BMW for over 5 years on digital automotive experiences. And I'm running a podcast and a conference called DesignWays, which is interviewing design leaders on the positive effect designers can do through their job. And this is a personal exploration I'm on since over 2 years, understanding what is the positive impact we can make as a design community to business, to society, and the world at large. And the last thing is, after leaving BMW, I co-founded a company called Footprint, where we're helping businesses to reduce their emissions. So we're doing two things there. On the one side, we have a software where businesses can calculate their carbon footprint and understand how they can reduce their carbon footprint. So really focusing on reduction as a primarily focus. And the second thing we're doing, we do this also in a consulting format, basically a 2-week program called Climate Sprint, where we go into teams, internal teams, companies, and for 2 weeks look into how can we reduce the carbon footprint on a particular topic. Yeah? So 2-week sprint with education and ideation, and then quantification. This is always playing a big role. So which actions would actually lead to which kind of reduction in a company? Because that in the end kind of drives motivation because you have a clear number that you can work towards. So I'm going to talk about 3 things in this talk. The first one is about why we designers play actually a key role when it comes to sustainability, maybe a bigger role than we actually thought about. Second part is I would like to talk with you about like how can we help to make products and businesses more sustainable. And then the last part, I want to give you some quick tips and hands-on advice what you can do in your job to make the products you're working on and reduce the emissions of them. So I think what's really interesting to keep in mind is that the internet is actually the biggest thing we're ever going to build as a species. And this is kind of big to think about it that way. But it's basically a collective effort. We all work on that together. And we as designers, we're in the middle of it. We're shaping this internet, right? And this internet can basically accelerate a future that is more sustainable, or it can actually also create a lot of harm if it's not done in the right way. And we as designers play obviously a key role when it comes to designing all of these digital experiences across the internet. The other thing I like to think about when it comes to design is that I think very often as designers we don't feel like we have enough power yet maybe to make a change. But if you think about the evolution of design, actually the world is more designable than it's ever been. And I love this quote here from Mark Roston on the fact that if you look maybe 10, 20 years ago, we didn't have the tools that we have these days. You can download free design tools to design digital products. We have ability to collaborate online with people across the world. We can print in 3D, 3D printing. All kind of technologies are out there, and we're actually more empowered than ever. And we should make use out of that. The other thing to keep in mind is that design is actually a privilege, or being a designer is a privilege, because we're actually in a role where we kind of are part of creating the future. If you look at maybe a lot of other jobs, they may be not even part of shaping that future, but we're actually part of that. And I think oftentimes we don't see each other in that position, but actually we are. Yeah? Just like, of course, like a lot of other people have that privileged position. But I think the point is that I think we all seek to have more power in the process of decision-making, of influencing companies and influencing products. But the reality is we already have a lot more than a lot of other people. And I think we should treat it that way. I think the other thing is that, while there is a lot of interest, I think, from businesses to go into sustainability, a lot of companies struggle still to put this into a strategy and then even further put this into actual implementation and reduction steps. And this is exactly where we can help as designers to make that transition from, I think, a clear, market need and market interest towards actually a strategy and then sort of reduction steps. And this is what I'm going to talk a little bit about, like how can we design ourselves here? I think what's really important to also know about sustainability is that it requires collaboration, and there's actually no way around it. Yeah, you cannot innovate on sustainability and make companies more sustainable working in silos, just like with innovation in general. But it's even more true for sustainability because a lot of things are very interconnected, very depending on partners, suppliers, all kind of different things. If you kind of really look at it from a service design perspective, we look at the whole journey, basically, how is your product connecting to other product? If you look at the overall customer behavior, oftentimes these things are interlinked with different solutions and different businesses and other companies. So it requires collaboration, not just within a company, but also beyond the company. And this was actually one of the things we said from the very beginning at Footprint. It's like this collaboration needs to be designed for collaboration first. And that's the only way you can actually bring together people and actually make a change. I think one of the key challenges a lot of people have that want to drive sustainability forward in a company is that really very often the actions that you would like to see are depending on other people that maybe have other goals, right? So let's say you need to go to an engineer, the engineer needs to make a change, but the engineer has a lot of other things also to take care and a lot of other responsibilities and priorities, right? So it requires that collaboration across teams. And what's interesting is that if you bring people into the process and have them participate in ways how you can reduce emissions in a company, they're a lot more motivated for that. I think kind of to that point, it's important that you create shared ownership. Just like with innovation, again, it's the same with sustainability, but again, even more true because I think while innovation is sort of, has been always like an overall interest of the business, sustainability is a new topic. And sort of in order to motivate people to do something, you need to bring together stakeholders and actually take yourself to a little bit to the back as a designer and let other people shine and create shared ownership across the company. And as designers, we have the role to help that process and catalyze it forward. But you're not going to be able to move anything forward in a company if you're the only person who believes in it, or if it's like your idea and everyone is kind of seeing it that way. It should be something where the collective is basically sort of driving that idea forward, and everyone feels like they're also they have a part of ownership in it, or they're part of the creation process. So what can you do basically when you're part of these discussions, and like how can you find ways to bring in sustainability? I think if we're taking sustainability out of that chart, I think we all know it, right? Feasibility, desirability, viability. And of course, in the center of that is innovation, right? And if you want to create a win-win with like moving anything forward in a company, we of course, like a lot of the biggest interest we, of course, as designers very often have is the desirability, right? We want to create a desirable product. So if we want to create a win, we already know we have to either win over the engineers with the feasibility side or the viability side very often in order to get buy-in for any idea we would like to push forward, right? And we have to create that win-win. So it's important to understand the other sides in the process. Now, sustainability comes in as an additional stakeholder, so to say. The problem is nobody sits, the sustainability stakeholder is not sitting at the table. So if you're talking with your PMs, sustainability stakeholder is not there, right? So so you basically need to create a win-win between the sustainability factor and then other parties in the process. You can also draw the chart actually differently. You could actually think about sustainability being part of everything, right? So basically, it has to be, if a company really want to make progress, it has to be a KPI and a goal for people working on feasibility, for people working on viability, and people that are working on the desirability side. And then it's going to be a lot easier to create that win-win. But if the company is not there yet, you need to see how you can infuse it. I think in the later part of the talk, we're going to see a couple of ways how we can connect basically sustainability and feasibility, or sustainability and viability in sort of these strategic product discussions. I think the other thing to keep in mind is that in order to create that win-win with other stakeholders in the process, you need to try to speak their language. You know? So essentially I think as designers, we kind of used to have empathy for our users, right? We really fight for that. But we need to have the same empathy also for the internal stakeholders and the internal team, and really understanding also their needs as well, you know? And if you really have empathy and really understand, okay, the viability side, for example, the business stakeholders in the process, what are they driven by? What are their goals, right? And really trying to understand them, I think it's going to go a long way. And very often, it's also just a different type of language. So we use as designers to present our ideas to other designers, and we kind of know how to talk about it. But if you present it to a business stakeholder or a PM, or basically anyone outside of the design bubble, I think it's important to adapt to their language. So specifically, if you want to win over the business side, trying to understand how can you frame your solution towards talking more in the language of business, right? And kind of framing it a different way. I think a big one, for example, is the fact of risk. I think business stakeholders are a lot worried about risk in a company, right? So you can use sustainability also and talk about de-risking the future of the business. I think the other part is that actually the trends are all there, right? If you kind of look around, do a bit of research, you're going to find out that the market trends, they're all going in one direction. Customers want more sustainability from company. It's all going in that direction. And in terms of arguments that you may need in that process, there's a lot out there. We actually created a database for that. If you scan the QR code, or if you just get in touch with me after the talk, I'm happy to share that with you. It's basically a list of arguments, business arguments in terms of why sustainability matters. And I think luckily these days it's not so much of a hard discussion anymore because the trends are really there. But of course you can also leverage with internal surveys and data you maybe can get from your customers. That's going to be very powerful in the process. Another quote here is, for example, that more than 80% are more likely to work for a company than sets up for this environment. And it actually is also work and buy. And basically, it's not just an advantage also for the customers, but it's also actually an advantage for HR. So if you look at the young demographic, if companies want to attract that, it's very important that they involve sustainability also when it comes to their company overall, because that's what a lot of young people are seeking when they're looking for jobs. So, you know, maybe you were not, maybe in your job you may not have the opportunity to participate in these strategic discussions, right, around the product, about the future of the product, about maybe the future of the business even, right? So how can you get design involved there? And this is kind of interesting discussion. Actually, I've been trying to cover a lot in the podcast I'm doing, because I'm always wondering how can you change what the current responsibility of design and kind of offer more help towards other stakeholders as well. And there was an interesting discussion with Michael Soim here, who was appointed as the VP of design at a company called Grohe in Germany. And I talked to him about, he just got appointed there, and I talked with him about his process coming into the company as the new design leader, and how he tried to reposition design. And it's kind of interesting, and this is not just with him, but with many other people I've talked with. How can you change what design is currently doing and kind of grow the responsibility? I think it all starts with listening to the other people in the company. So I think, like, as designers, of course, we laser focus on the product. We want to make that as desirable as possible and want to evolve it in terms of the detailed experience. But if you want to get design being involved in areas where design hasn't been present yet, you need to have, again, empathy to the other people in the company and try to really understand them, listening. He said, basically, for the first months, he was purely just listening to the problems the company has, right? And if you involve discussion, and if you listen to maybe larger shareouts in a meeting, try to understand what are the challenges your company is facing, not just you as a designer in your day-to-day job, but what challenges are the people in the company facing? Right? What is the main problem of the CEO right now? What is the main problem of the sales team right now? What is the main problem of the marketing right now? And kind of listening in and trying to understand the problem. And then what he did is, he then just offered help. He said, like, okay, well, we're not typically involved here, but maybe we can do something about it, right? So, and then, of course, if you do it a few times, if you offer your help to areas where design maybe hasn't been present yet, then you're moving from a team that is primarily focusing, for only the product experience, towards a partner in the company for innovation in general, a team that people like to go to. And after some time, he said, like, well, he changed the perception of what design is in the company. They moved from being only a design team towards being an innovation partner also for other problems they have in the company. And if you try to do this a few times, then you will be seen that way. Even if you're basically the only designer, or maybe you have a very small design team, think about how can you get involved to the bigger problems the company is facing. Because your product experience is just one problem, right? For the CEO or for the business, right? They have a lot of other problems. So you need to really listen to that as well and see how can you contribute. Can you maybe join a workshop and visualize something? Can you create a storyboard for the team, right? And then after some time, they're going to pull you in automatically if they have another challenge. They say like, hey, let's bring in the designers. Maybe they can help us solving this problem. So it's up to us, right? I think like very often, basically we say, like, well, design is not important enough at a company. Well, it's up to you to change that. Yeah. So it's our responsibility as designers to change that. The other thing to think about is that we obviously, like I mentioned, with digital products, we're driving behavior. Now, I think what's interesting is that I talked to Matt Wallert, who wrote a book called Start at the End, and he talks about having a behavior vision board at the very beginning of your project. So basically, we start out with new stakeholders on a project. Think about like, what is the final behavior you want to create for your customer, and then work your way backwards, right? So instead of just starting with basically the MVP and basically the function aspect, think about not just like what are the functions, but what is the customer behavior you want to create in the long run, right? What are the things we want to create for the customer when it comes to their behavior? And then you work your way back towards the solution you're creating, and always keep this in mind. And if you align with across a team very early on, it's going to be so helpful, because it's really a filter you can see to all kinds of decisions you make when it comes to the product or the business. And of course, it's not just something where designers are involved. This is actually something that all kind of people are involved. If you look at the sales team, for example, the marketing team, etc., if you align across the company on a customer behavior or like a user behavior you want to create at the very end, then everyone can contribute towards that behavior. And I think that's interesting to think about, like, how can you bring in sustainability as a key aspect here? How can you make that something that the customer maybe feels or is empowered by in your product or sort of as a brand experience? I think like what I learned from all of these discussions with the different design leaders, I think it boils down to sort of like, I think like two superpowers we have as designers we should use in that process. And the first superpower we have as designers is something I think we often underestimate because it's so natural to us, is we are really good at materializing the abstract. Yeah? So what we can really help teams with is an imagination process, helping teams imagine what it could be and turn this into a prototype before writing any code. Because the problem is companies and industries, they have to do a big change now, right? They have to deal with the unfamiliar. And that's a challenge because, the company and the brand has to evolve, right? And it's very difficult for people to make these decisions just based out of an abstract idea, or post-its. But what we as designers can do is we can join these discussions and can visualize them. That can be as simple as a whiteboard doodle, but it could also be just a sketch or a prototype, of course, or a video. And we can really help in that process to accelerate things forward. Because if you have that artifact, if you can help teams creating these artifacts about how that brand experience could feel like, that actually it doesn't have to be right from the very beginning. I think probably your first prototype, people are going to say, well, maybe it's not perfect. But what you do is you take it one step further. Now you can take that artifact as a baseline to bring in additional input and move it to the next ideation phase, right? So you help to accelerate that process, because otherwise it's always going to be stuck. And the problem also is in these discussions about the future of the business, a lot of people talking about different things, but everyone has a different image in their head when they hear about certain words, right? So if we think about one word, for example, an elephant, the elephant is going to be different. So basically between the picture we have in our head, right? And it's the same if you take more complex discussions. If you have these in a company, everyone has a slight different way to sort of imagine that. And with a prototype and an artifact, you can help to bring it into one picture. And again, this picture might not match with everyone, but you can use it as a way to kind of get to the next ideation, generate feedback. So visualization sort of being one superpower we can use in the process. The other superpower is that we can do is what does that output then actually does, and specifically like talking about outcome. Yeah. So what kind of emotions we can, what are the outcomes we can create to that? I think I talked to so many design leaders, and I think one of the things that very often stood out when they explored a new venture or basically were spinning off a business venture in a company, it was very often that one of the really strong superpowers of designer is creating confidence. And creating confidence basically in a solution that you are going to develop, right? Because you can emotionalize what it could be. You can turn it into sort of an attractive picture of the future and test it out, right? So for example, I talked to Jiva Jaini here. He's a designer at Google, and he talked about like how they invented Google Kids, YouTube Kids. And it all started with basically just a design prototype, right? And they tested out, they created a video of like how it could potentially work out. They shared via email, went viral internally at Google, and everyone saw this video and saw people using this product. They didn't have any written line of code yet. But by seeing like what the product could be, how the product could evolve, people bought into it. They got internal funding, and now you can of course like download it from the App Store. And I think like that's a lot of a key role we have as designers. We need to explore these futures, and we need to instill confidence and belief into people what that future could be. But it's not only basically for making business decisions. It's a little bit bigger than that. It's also for the employees that have to work on that, right? If you sort of go into a certain direction, you have multiple people that need to go into that direction and work towards that every day, right? But if everyone has that North Star in front of them, that sort of vision that you share across the company, then people are going to be a lot more motivated doing their work. But it's also on the other side, besides like the employee and the internal confidence, it's also about investor confidence, for example, or external customer confidence in your brand, right? Specifically, if you're in a startup, I think that's sort of one contribution we can make as designers. We can help to create confidence, for example, on the investor side, what the product could be, even though maybe your MVP is more technical and doesn't have all of the details yet that you would like an investor to think about. You can help to create that confidence in terms of what the company could achieve. Now, I would like to talk a little bit about more concrete things when it comes to UX UI. Everything before was very much focusing on strategy and sort of product experience and businesses at large. So if we're kind of diving into what could be things that say what are examples when it comes to the digital product experience that sort of foster sustainability. So this is one example here of Lime, which is a biking app. And basically, if you are done with your trip, basically it shows you how much CO2 you have saved by taking a bike, right? And basically, it gives you a very positive feeling. I remember using myself. It feels really great, like after the trip, right? Now, I think what they also do is they allow people to share it, right? That's sort of almost like multiplying your impact, because then actually people are proud of, if they have done something positive in the environment, people are proud of that. And I think like giving people the opportunity to communicate it, giving brands the opportunity to communicate it to the outside, but even individuals basically, I think that's really powerful. On the other side, I think what's interesting is that it's easy to integrate, of course, like after the conversion, right? So basically, this was after the trip, right? I think if you think about your customer, your product digital customer experience, you're going to notice that when everything that's before the conversion, it's a battleground of which information we kind of show to a user, right? And sometimes you don't want to overload the cognitive load, right? But after the conversion, the transaction happening, it's a bit more open for ideas what you can do, right? And there you actually have the opportunity to maybe display such information, right? And specifically, I think if you can focus on the positive, think about the product that you have and what are positive things that happen to the usage of your product. And you might be surprised, some of the products you work with, you haven't never thought about it, but maybe if you reflect on it, you maybe find things that your product is doing that are actually driving sustainability that you not even think about, right? And you can celebrate them in your digital experience as well. Another thing to think about when you design digital solutions are these 6 points here. So reflect on your digital product and ask yourself, how can I make the user rethink the action or this behavior, refuse an action, How can I make the user reduce something the user is doing? And then the last three, they are more sort of connected to the physical experience. So how can I make someone reuse something, repair something, recycle something? A couple of other things on sort of digital interface experiences is that I've been talking about kilogram CO2 in that chart before, right? The problem is with the number CO2, people can not really deal with it. It's not really like a currency that people know, okay, how much is $1, for example, or €1? People don't really have a feeling about like what does 10 kilograms CO2 actually mean. They cannot relate that information, right? So you need to somehow convert it into something, right? So we have been actually doing like a little application that does exactly that. So you can look up everything from a trip you're doing to, let's say, all kind of different foods or shopping behaviors, etc. And then basically you can click on something and then can calculate the trip and can compare how does it match up versus, let's say, eating vegan, for example, or making a vegan food choice, right? Because the problem is we have a hard time relating these numbers into our lives, right? This is a big problem. So I would always recommend, if you can, if the display space allows for it, somehow at least like show a comparison. For example, how much does it mean in sort of like driving distance, for example? How much does it mean for a different kind of user action that the person can better relate into the personal life? The other thing is that you can, of course, show that if you have the opportunity to show that before basically the user does an action, that can be also very powerful. So I've been working a lot on that as well. So let's say you before an action, for example, how much CO2 would you save to that? Kind of showing that as a preview can be also very powerful to give people context. Specifically, for example, this case, for example, when it comes to offsetting, for example. And this is another example where basically we compare basically after the action was done, basically to give people just a hint of like just an educational aspect. Okay, like you have been doing this trip, think about your next trip, this is how much you could save if you would have been picking a different mobility choice, for example, right? So of education, I think is also a powerful thing if we have the ability to integrate this into our products. Now, before ending, I would like to wrap up with 12 quick tips, basically, or aspects we can reflect on when it comes to our digital product. So, and what you're going to see is that these things, like designing for more sustainability products and good user experience, actually, sometimes they're actually overlapping, right? So, the first one, of course, if you can reduce flow steps, right? If you have people just can basically do things in less steps. You don't have less screens to load, etc. The next one is cognitive load and friction, right? I mean, if your UX, UI is not really great, if the user is overloaded, they might not get to the action they actually want to, and you just waste time and energy with the user for them to do it. So essentially, the first 2 points here are really just connected to good digital product design. So if you design a really good digital product design, oftentimes it's also sustainable. Next one, responsible content strategy. I think, ask yourself, do we really have to put out that piece of content? Does it add anything? And also ask yourself, sometimes it's helpful to maybe update a certain content you have instead of like recreating it. Because this could be very powerful for SEO, for example. Right? The other thing is when it comes to your content you put out, make sure it's actionable. Right? If you let's say you put out a blog post, make sure people can use that blog post, and if they're interested, know how to ways to get further from there. Right? So they don't have to search again and like lose time. The next one is about secondary information read. I think this is sort of connected to this positive impact with the biking service, for example. So maybe your primary service is not about sustainability, right? But do you have ways to add a secondary information and educate the user about the sustainability factor when it comes to the product? And again, can you focus on the positive areas? Is there something positive you could highlight? Or is it an educational aspect you can integrate? Next one is about design systems, right? I mean, this is a low-hanging fruit. Right? If you have a design system, And components can be reused. Specifically, developers can reuse components, etc. And code snippets, that's of course more sustainable. The next one people ask a lot about is like color usage. Okay, people always ask like, what color is more sustainable, right? And you can basically, it depends a little bit on the display technology, but sort of the way you can look at it, the more brighter the color, the more energy it consumes, right? So if you wondered yourself why the slides are black, that's why. An exception is blue. Blue consumes a little bit more energy, but sort of that serves as a rule basically. So black mode is indeed more sustainable if you want to say so. Now, the next one, fonts and icons. This is another one people often ask about. And it's actually, we don't think about it too much, but if you constantly have to load a font on the website, that of course creates emission. And then icons, SVGs are more sustainable than PNGs in terms of just like the size and the integration into your product. And the last one, this is actually a really big one. And there are ways in your product where you can, on the back end, you can integrate this actually more automated, depending on the display size. But really think about the image size. This is like a big one, actually, when it comes to your product and website, if you can reduce the image size. And there are ways also, sort of back-end solutions we worked on where basically it only loads an image size, or it basically just shows in the right amount of, in the size right amount for that device, for example. Yeah. And then the last four, basically, green hosting provider, right? That's really a big one if you are able to do that with your website or product you're hosting. Set yourself performance budget. This is interesting. So basically, there are ways and websites where you can basically set yourself a performance budget, or for example, you can see like what's the size of the website, for example, of competitors, and then you can set yourself a goal, right, that you maybe want to go a little bit lower, and then work your way towards that with the things I've been mentioning, right? So how can you get below that? And you can measure that actually, right? There are ways to measure that. The other thing is like tracking, right? So I think it's very interesting for us to track all kinds of different things, but actually tracking is also, consumes a lot of energy actually. Sometimes the product is even slower in terms of loading speed. So think about yourself, what are the actual things we actually need to track, right? And the last one is using server-side caching. So things don't have to be reloaded. Now, what did we learn? So we learned three things. Number one, as designers, we play a critical role when it comes to shaping products, shaping businesses, and user behavior for more sustainability. Now, the next one we learned, the second thing we learned is we can actually have a lot bigger impact if we are involved early in the process and can basically influence the design, the product brief, right? And then help in sort of catalyzing discussions, right? If we kind of growing our responsibility as designers. And the last one is if you are primarily executing on an existing design brief and it's really hard for you to get involved on the product brief discussion or the business vision, then there are also some small things that you can do that I just highlighted in the last charts. Now, two course of actions here. So on the one side, we have been building a large database of just like sustainability design resources. So feel free to reach out for that if you'd like to have a list of website, additional links, resources where you can get more information. And the second one, if you would like to reduce your emissions basically in your product or business, also we offer this 2-week sprints for businesses to do that. Now, I think that's it for now, and thank you so much for your time. Looking forward to the questions.
Thank you so much, Sebastian. Really many interesting insights. We have a few questions to you. So the first one, how do you identify and avoid greenwashing? Do you consult your design decisions with climate scientists, for example?
This is a really good one. One of the key problems with communication of sustainability is that if you think about the landing page, if you think about all the things you need to explain around your product, all kind of functions, what the product is doing, etc., then you also need to talk about sustainability. What we oftentimes notice, like, well, you fight on the cognitive load against all the other things you need to explain around your product, right? So how much percentage can you get on that landing page, for example, right? How much of the overall product communication can you can you use for sustainability, right? And very often it is that way that it boils down to just a very short mentioning about what it is, right? Now, one thing to kind of look at greenwashing is then if companies don't allow you to learn more, right? So if a company talks about like, well, it's sustainability and they don't have a button there to dig deeper, if they don't have any more information about it, that's sort of a red flag, I would say, right? So what we oftentimes do is like, okay, it has to boil down to something very simple. You know? Maybe a label, maybe some kind of like short part of the website and something like that. But then like, you should allow the user to really dig deep. So we have been, for example, and because there's so much to talk about when it comes to sustainability. On like our solutions, we even show, you can even look up all the sources of all the research. Like, you know, if people really like to do that, you know. The other thing is that sometimes people are not interested, right? But basically, they want to see basically, okay, it's sustainable. But like, like as a company, you should allow the user to dig deep and actually be fully transparent around like how is it more sustainable? Right? So basically having that level of detail there, I think it's important. And if companies don't do it, I think it's kind of like a red flag. Maybe it's pretty shallow. Yeah? But it's also advice if you integrate sustainability in your product that you think about, okay, it might be pretty, we maybe not get the most attention on the main touch point, but like how can we allow the user to really dig deep and make that fully transparent? I think it's important.
Okay, thank you. Another one. What are the main metrics you can pay attention in design in terms of climate positive actions?
That's an interesting one. I think one of the things to think about is, of course, like you can think about, you can use surveys, of course, to get feedback about that. You should anyways test that before you roll out anything, right? You should get feedback or do at least like A/B testing, right? But I would always recommend to get some kind of customer feedback, specifically before you made the decision, and then really understand how much are people interested in that, right? So I think that's sort of like one way to look, and you can sort of like keep looking at that, sort of like how does maybe evolve over time. But I think in terms of a KPI, I think sort of like it's a good question. I think like I would look at surveys. I would look, for example, like, and you can measure this over time. First of all, do you think this is a relevant content to you? Do you think this was helpful to you? And then over time, you can, for example, kind of learn, okay, how do you perceive the brand in terms of sustainability? Is it like a brand that's getting perceived as a sustainable brand, right? So that's sort of the metrics I would probably look at.
Okay, yeah. Great. And the last one question, how to speak the language of business about designing for the environment?
Yeah, and I think it's important to understand what are the problems of the business and then sort of combine it with, so for example, like, well, if the company wants to, let's say, it has a certain KPI, let's say they want to drive more retention, see how you can intersect that with sustainability, right? Are there reasons for people to use your application more because you infuse sustainability, right? It's specifically, very often, some of these things can be very soft, so maybe it boils down to maybe brand perception or basically how loyal people are towards a brand. What you can see is that on the market research is that people prefer to work or buy, if you consider buy meaning also use, brands and businesses that are sustainability, right? If they stand up for the environment, they are more likely to cater towards these brands. So that's one way to look at it. The other thing is like some of the things that I mentioned, we're actually helping the feasibility side, right? Sometimes it actually can make things easier technically also to make something more sustainable because it's a reduction very often. But yeah.